Hi, my name is Stephanie Cortez, and this is my presentation about the war on drugs. So, it is a phrase that's used to refer to a government-led initiative that aims to stop the illegal drug use, distribution, and trade by increasing and enforcing strict penalties for offenders. The movement started in the 1970s and is still evolving today. Over the years, people have had mixed reactions to the campaign. The Smoking Opium Exclusion Act in 1909 banned the possession, importation, and use of opium for smoking in the 1890s, and there was obviously some propaganda and publications that were sent out to make this known. Richard Nixon declares the war on drugs in 1979. 1984, the Sentencing Reform Act was passed, and the amount of incarcerated Americans reached its highest point. The first U.S. law that restricted the distribution and use of certain drugs was the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. This act resulted from the need to limit opioid use. It governed the marketing and sale of narcotics and its use. In 1919, the United States passed the 18th Amendment prohibiting the sale, manufacture, and transportation of alcohol, with exceptions for religious and medical use. The present state of incarceration in the U.S. as a result of the war on drugs arrived in several stages. By 1971, different stops on drugs had been implemented for more than 50 years with only a very small increase of inmates per 100,000 citizens. During the first 9 years after Nixon coined the expression war on drugs, statistics showed only a minor increase in the total number of imprisoned. The commonly used illegal drugs. Cocaine possession is illegal across the U.S., with the cheaper crack cocaine incurring even greater penalties. Having possession is when the accused knowingly has it on their person or in a backpack or purse. Possession of cocaine with no prior conviction for the first offense will be sentenced to a maximum of 1 year in prison or fined $1,000, or in some cases, which is almost all of them, they're going to get penalized with both. And marijuana is the most popular illegal drug worldwide. It's probably because due to the fact that it's so easy to grow and people have many resources and access to it. And especially the sad part is that young teens even use this. And even though it's an illegal drug here in Texas and some other states like California and Colorado, they can use it without no harm. Some scholars have claimed that the phrase war on drugs is propaganda, cloaking an extension of earlier military operations. Others have argued that large amounts of drug war, foreign aid money, training, and equipment actually goes to fighting leftist insurgencies and is often provided to groups who themselves are involved in large-scale narco trafficking, such as corrupted members of the Colombian army. The operations in Honduras. In 2012, the U.S. and DEA agents to Honduras to assist security forces and counter narcotics operations. It has been a major stop for drug traffickers to use small planes and landing strips hidden throughout the country to transport drugs. The U.S. government made agreements with several Latin American countries to share intelligence and resources to counter the drug trade. So we can see here it goes from South America, Colombia, and then it goes to countries like Guatemala and Honduras. And then from there, back in Colombia, it goes through Mexico, transports to Mexico, and it goes to places like Baja California, and it goes to the border in Laredo, McAllen, and over here. The creation of permanent underclass. Some authors maintain that the war on drugs has resulted in the creation of a permanent underclass of people who have few educational or job opportunities, often result in being punished for drug offenses, which in turn have resulted from attempts to earn a living in spite of having no education or job opportunities. So basically, if they get fined for simple drug offenses like, let's say, possession of marijuana, some job companies and schools and colleges could take that seriously, and they could lose all that just for something that could seem minor in comparison to drug trafficking. They could get the same treatment of that. The cost to taxpayers. Low taxation in Central American countries has been credited with weakening the region's response to dealing with drug traffickers. Many cartels, especially Los Zetas, have taken advantage of the limited resources of these nations. 2010 tax revenue in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras composed just 13.53% of GDP. As a comparison, in Chile and the U.S., taxes were 18.6% and 26.9% of GDP, respectively. However, direct taxes on income are very hard to enforce, and in some cases, tax evasion is seen as a national pastime. And we can see here, these are some statistics about the drugs and the cost to taxpayers. We find that Illinois taxpayers are picking up $220 million in incarceration costs for sentences handed out under 13 enhanced drug laws and enacted from 2000 to 2011. So as the government supposedly gets stricter on these drug laws, more people are being incarcerated, and more people have to pay for them being incarcerated. The impact on growers. The status of coca and coca growers has become a contentious political issue in several countries, including Colombia, Bolivia, where the president, Evo Morales, a former cocoa growers union leader, has promised to legalize the traditional cultivation and use of cocoa. Obviously, from his former background as a union leader, he would want that for his country. Indeed, legalization efforts have yielded some success in the Morales administration when combined with aggressive and targeted eradication efforts. The country saw a 12 to 13% decline in cocoa cultivation. In 2011, under Morales, who has used the Cocoa Growers Federation to ensure compliance with the law rather than providing a primary role for security forces. The CIA and contra cocaine trafficking. Senator John Kerry, the 1988 U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations report on contra drug links concludes that members of the U.S. State Department who provided support for the Contras are involved in drug trafficking, and elements of the Contras themselves knowingly receive financial and material assistance from drug traffickers. The report further states that the Contra drug links include payments to drug traffickers by the U.S. State Department of funds authorized by the Congress for humanitarian assistance to the Contras, in some cases after the traffickers had been indicted by federal law enforcement agencies on drug charges. And this also goes hand in hand to the heroin trafficking. According to Ronnie Campbell, an editorial assistant at Nelson Rockefeller, during World War II, the United States Navy, concerned that strikes and labor disputes in U.S. eastern shipping ports would disrupt wartime logistics, released the mobster Lucky Luciano from prison and collaborated with them to help the mafia take control of these ports. Labor union members were terrorized and murdered by mafia members as a means of preventing labor unrest and ensuring smooth shipping of supplies to Europe. The efficiency of the war on drugs. In 1986, the U.S. Defense Department funded a two-way study by the RAND Corporation, which found that the use of the armed forces to indirect drugs coming to the United States will have little or no effect on cocaine traffic and might, in fact, raise the profits of cocaine cartels and manufacturers. The study noted that 7 prior studies in the past 9 years, including one by the Center for Naval Research and the Office of Technology Assessment, had come to similar conclusions. Interdiction efforts, including current armed forces resources, would have almost no effect on cocaine importation into the United States, the report concluded. The war in Vietnam. Many of the servicemen attended to heroin use after returning to the United States but came home addicted. In 1971, the U.S. military conducted a study of drug use among American servicemen and women. Found that daily usage rates for drugs on a worldwide basis were as low as 2%. However, in the spring, 2 congressmen released a report that 50% of the servicemen who were serving in Vietnam were addicted to heroin, probably so they could combat against the violent things that they saw. And since they were obviously drafted, they didn't have no experience in seeing all those bodies, and that's probably like a release valve for them, were the heroin. And it had become for an issue, and it was estimated that 30,000 of the servicemen were addicted to drugs, most of them were heroin. And since they were in a foreign country, it was more accessible to get it from there than get it from back home in the United States. And from there on, those who went to serve were required to take a mandatory heroin test. And if they failed it, they had to stay more time in Vietnam, more time serving until, their tests came out to be negative. And these comes out to lead to operations like Operation Just Cause. The United States raided Panama for this operation, which involved 25,000 American troops. General Manuel Noriega, head of the government of Panama, had been giving military assistance to Contra groups in Nicaragua at the request of the U.S., which in exchange tolerated his drug trafficking activities, which they had known about since the 1960s. When the DEA tried to indict him in 1971, the CIA prevented them from doing so, because obviously that ties together. They don't want to lose those ties. This also gives into Plan Colombia. The United States currently now provides hundreds of millions of dollars per year of military aid, training, and equipment to Colombia to fight left-wing guerrillas such as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, which has been accused of being involved in drug trafficking. Colombian military personnel have received extensive counter-surgery training from the U.S. military and law enforcement agencies, including the SOA. This goes also to the Merida Initiative, and it's a security cooperation between the U.S. and government of Mexico and the countries of Central America. Its stated aim is combating the threats of drug trafficking and transnational crime. It appropriated $1.4 billion in a 30-year commitment. Mexican government for military law enforcement training and equipment, as well as technical advice. It targeted many very important government officials, but it failed to address the thousands of Central Americans who had to flee their countries to the dangers they face every day because of the war on drugs. So you may ask, what's the legality of the situation? And it is argued that drug prohibition, as presently implemented, violated substantive due process doctrine in that its benefits do not justify the encroachments on rights that are supposed to be guaranteed by the 5th and 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. U.S. District Judge Mary S. Scriven ruled that Florida's legislation purporting to eliminate intent as an element of the crime of drug possession was unconstitutional. Commentators explained the ruling in terms of due process. Alternatives. Some believe that United States federal and state governments have chosen wrong methods for combating the distribution of illicit substances. Aggressive, heavy-handed enforcement funnels individuals through courts and prisons instead of treating the cause of the addiction. The focus of the government efforts had been on punishment. By making drugs illegal rather than regulating them, the war on drugs creates a highly profitable black market. Jefferson Fish has edited scholarly collections of articles offering a wide variety of public health-based and rights-based alternative drug policies. The aerial herbicide application. The U.S. regularly sponsors the spraying of large amounts of herbicides over the jungles of Central and South America as part of its drug eradication programs. The environmental consequences resulting from these have been criticized as detrimental to some of the world's most fragile ecosystems. Nixon and the generation gap. June 1971, President Nixon declared a war on drugs and increased the size and presence of federal drug control agencies and pushed through measures such as mandatory sentencing and no-knock warrants. In his campaign in 1968, the Nixon White House after that, and two enemies, the anti-war left, and sadly the African Americans. The drug hysteria. The presidency of Ronald Reagan marked the start of a long period of skyrocketing rates of incarceration, largely thanks to his unprecedented expansion of the drug war. Public concern about illicit drug use built throughout the 1980s, largely due to media portrayals of people addicted to the smokable form of cocaine dubbed crack. Soon after that, Nancy Reagan began this anti-drug campaign with the slogan "Just Say No." Under George W. Bush, there was a rapid escalation of the militarization of domestic drug law enforcement. By the end of his term, there were about 40,000 paramilitary-style SWAT raids on Americans every year, mostly for nonviolent drug law offenses, often misdemeanors. While federal reform mostly stalled under Bush, state-level reforms finally began to slow the growth of the drug war and the Drugs War. So what are the results of these? Well, the war on drugs in the U.S. has been a failure that has ruined lives, filled prisons, and cost a fortune. It started during the Nixon administration with the idea that because drugs are bad for people, they should be difficult to obtain. And as a result, it became a war on the supply.